Huh. I am muted and it muted again somehow. Okay. All right, we're good. Let's try this. I don't know what I'm going to play for sure, but we'll see what comes out. A little bit of this and a little bit of that all put together. Okay. Today is the ending of one day of celebration, or not the full ending, but this was the ending of the first day of it. And that is this, what we call the winter solstice. In other languages, they call it the Yule, the Gyul, the Jol, the Noel. Any number of words are used to describe one particular thing, not just in the northern climes of Europe, although that's probably what most of us are used to, but also all over the world. There are structures which are made specifically to capture the day and time of the summer solstice. This was the day when people could let go of some of the things that had happened to them during the year. There's the burning of little lanterns, which is sort of like our idea of a burning bowl. And there are many other types of things that occur during this time. Here's the thing that's different about this celebration than is different about the one that we are getting ready to partake upon. And that is that the basic underlying emotion that started all of this was fear. Fear that the sun would not come back. Fear that the days would close and never again would they experience the ability to have brightness and sunshine in their lives. And so therefore they would immediately try to reach out to this God, this being, this power in the sky that controlled all of this, and say, hey, don't forget about us. By burning a log, by having some sense of fire and brightness that they could use as a substitute for the sun, hoping that they would contact this God and this God would say, okay, you're not exactly what I would want. Most of you are on my list of naughty and not nice, but we will allow you to live once more. And after a few days, they would notice that the sun was coming up on the horizon again a little bit more, and a little bit more. And the celebration of life once again having warmth in it. How far back in memory is this idea? How far back did these peoples have in their memory a time in their lives when the sun not coming back was something that their forebears, their forefathers and mothers had told them there was a time when the sun stayed gone so long, though we weren't sure if we would ever make it. And yet we did. We did it by contacting a sense of the universe that we call, and whatever they called it, it might have been Odin, it might have been Yol, it might have been any number of beings, but it was some kind of a spiritual being, all powerful, that was causing the sun to go away from them and allowing the sun to come back to them. You know, I often think, did this go all the way back to a terrible ice age that they thought would never end? Did it all start with the idea of a meteor hitting the earth and causing a cloud to envelop the earth for so long that no sunlight got through and they thought it would never come back? Is this the story? Is this the story that was given to them and told to them to always remember and celebrate and honor this God who restored the light? Is that the idea? Is that what carried through? Well, of course, we'll never really know, but we do know that something was going on that allowed them to think. This is an important time, a time that we must remember. Remember in trepidation that it might happen again, and to do everything that is required of us to keep the sun returning. It's crazy for us to think of that in a scientific age, something we know so much more about. And we think that we are so much more intelligent and gifted and sophisticated. But you know what? Those people, with the gifts that they had, were able to be in touch with the world around them in a way that we aren't as much anymore. We live in our artificial environments that each of us is in right at this very moment that I speak. It's not just a large fire in the front of a cave opening. It's not a hole in the ground that we use to keep ourselves warm as long as we can. And these people were in touch so much more with the stars in the sky, the days, the nights, the ability to be in touch to the earth that they lived in and on. Much more so than we are today. Much more so. We are the ones living the unsophisticated environmental idea. Oh yeah, we want to save the environment, but we don't want to, but we want to use as much energy as we want in whatever form it's in. Times have changed over the eons, over the millennia, over the generations. Times have changed. More and more, we have isolated ourselves from the natural world. We've isolated ourselves from the stars in the sky and the moons and the movement of all the planets. We've isolated ourselves from this. We no longer take upon ourselves the idea that it's important for us to be fully in touch, that our very breathing, our very sight, our very touch, our very smell, all of our senses are important to have and to use in a proper way. We don't do it anymore. We don't do it at all. We live a much more artificial life. However, we still celebrate something close to, and was mentioned earlier, something that has taken the place of the winter solstice. Now let's move forward in history quite a bit. Let's move past the Egyptians. Let's move past the Mayans. Let's move. By the way, the Mayans not only had an idea of this solstice, they had an idea that one of the ways that we can bring back this sun once more and put it properly in the sky so that we can harvest our crops and so forth, they did it through sacrifice. Human sacrifice, taking the hearts of people. But you know, here's the thing about this. We consider those people as being victims to an age in which this sacrifice was an incredibly important thing. As it turns out, they weren't always victims. Sometimes they were volunteers. They saw their lives as having importance and having a great gift if they could help the whole family of humanity as they knew it. If they could help it, bringing it forth by giving of their life, they were willing to do this. We see it as only one way. We see it as, oh, these people were, savages, and they tore the hearts out of people with their flint knives and so forth. Yes, they did, but sometimes these people that they were doing this to were volunteers, not victims. It wasn't always the same way. Having said that, still we have moved forward in some degrees and moved backward in other degrees. We know that this celebration of the winter solstice has gone on for eons, literally eons, through the Stone Age and Bronze Age and so forth. It's gone on and on and on. And now here we are in our age, this electronic age that we're in now. But we still celebrate something which goes back to a time when people felt like if we can keep this Yule log burning, we will be able to bring the sun back and we will once again have longer days. You know, one of the things that I did in my many travels and so forth in life, as most of you know, I was a professional musician. And the first job I ever had in Nashville was playing bass guitar for a guy named Glenn Shirley. He's a guy who wrote Greystone Chapel while he was in Folsom Prison, and Johnny Cash recorded the song, and because of this helped him get out of prison. And so he put a band together and he went on the road, and I was his first bass player. The first place we played music was right during this time of year. Right during this time. It was actually right between Christmas and New Year's, and it was in Alaska. I'd never been to Alaska before, but I got on a Northwest airline plane and headed out toward Alaska. Went by the mountains and so forth and finally landed there. I experienced an entirely different way of being in Alaska because of how cold it was. The first night that we were there, it was 58 degrees below zero Fahrenheit. 58 degrees below. And we entertained ourselves by pouring a glass of water, opening the door and throwing it into the air and hearing it go and turn to ice crystals as it hit the ground immediately. And I can't tell you how many times we did that over and over and over, saying, can you believe it? Can you believe it? Can you believe it? Look at this. Somebody record it. Well, we didn't have phones that could do that back in those days, so we just had to keep a memory of the whole idea of it. What I really wanted to get to, though, was as I was walking down the street of Anchorage, Alaska, I looked over my shoulder, and it was noon, and the sun in the sky was about this high above the horizon, and the daylight lasted 3 hours. 3 hours. I saw the sun come up, go to noon, and go down in 3 hours. The rest of it was darkness. So I know what those people are feeling like. Yes, I can't say I felt fear because, after all, I come from the scientific age. I am so sophisticated. But I felt worry. I felt worry about, is this ever going to happen over the entire world? Will there ever come a time when the Earth shifts in its axis and orbit so that we all have a day that lasts 3 hours or less? Those thoughts went through my mind. So you see, it's easy. I think it's easy once you experience something like that to get the idea in your mind that there's something to worry about, something to fear if we do not have sunlight. Now, going forward, millennia more. The idea was changed, and because the calendar didn't quite match up the way they wanted it to, the Romans had a festival that they carried out to make up the difference in days for their year. They had a bunch of leftover days on their calendar, and so they had a time that they called Saturnalia or Saturnalia. And this is the time when everything could go in reverse. The masters did what the servants or slaves, they only called them servants, they had a euphemistic term for them, servants. But although they bought them and owned them and throughout their lives and could trade them on the market and so forth, and they would do what the slaves wanted done, and they would feed them, and they would wash their feet, and they would have lots of jokes between the two of them. Ha ha ha! Isn't this funny? Isn't this wonderful? Yeah, but it's only going to last a short amount of time, and then we're going to go back to the way things really should be. So they did this, and they had a bunch of drunken riots and people going through the streets, hollering and going from one place to another, and sort of a Halloween thing, playing tricks on one another and so forth. And this Saturnalia was really something. It really was. And it was so much fun, and people liked it so well that when time finally came that Christianity came to be in the world, the Christians wanted to end this sort of thing because they had much more of a modest view of life, not running through the streets naked and sleeping with whoever you wanted to and doing whatever you wanted to do. Having all that going on, they immediately tried to ban it. Well, banning fun? Okay, how do you do that? Well, it wasn't very easy. It wasn't easy to do, and we all know what happened. The only way that they could defeat it was by placing and stretching the skin of Christianity over it and placing the birth of Jesus, the light of the world, at that same time. By doing this, they actually changed the whole idea of what Saturnalia was. Saturnalia. They changed it. They changed it forever. And they changed it into what we call the Christmas days. The days of Christmas, the seasons, all put together. Now, it just so happens that the Christians came out of a different type of religion called Judaism. And Judaism had a celebration very near the same time. And they call it the Festival of Lights, or they call it by a different name totally, Hanukkah, how you ever wish you want to pronounce it. The Festival of Lights, the keeping light burning, keeping it going. A miracle that they knew of, and they kept it going. Well, Isn't it just amazing that out of this group of people, one thing is in common between them all? Light. Light. Keeping light going. We call Jesus, the baby, the light of the world. We call it enlightenment when we see and can hear and understand that this day, this special day, really has nothing to do with his birth. It didn't happen then, as Reverend John pointed out. It didn't happen then. It happened much earlier. It happened probably, like he says, in late September, early October. That can be it can be traced down and planted in that time period. And if you just think about it, shepherds out in the fields in December, most of them would have their animals put away for somewhere close by, not just out in the hills someplace. Anyway, having said all this, we're talking about the same thing regardless of what it is. But rather than having it all begin as the original idea of the winter solstice based on fear or worry, it's based on joy, happiness. It's based on something totally different. Totally different. A feeling of contentment, a feeling of not being afraid. And that's one of the wonderful things that we hear throughout that scriptural part of the idea of it. The angels in heaven, be not afraid. The angel that comes to Mary, fear not, be not afraid. And that's the message to us. Be not afraid. The light is here. The light remains. It'll always remain. And so we've got this Christmas season upon us again. How are we going to celebrate it? Well, here's a new one for you. We've always celebrated Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. Some people now are celebrating December 23rd, and they call it Christmas Adam. Christmas Adam, Christmas Eve, Christmas Day. And the whole idea of it is that on that day, they will eat apples and ribs. Apples and ribs. Gee, wonder why. Isn't that wild? But it's a new holiday new tradition that some people are trying to start. And why Adam first? Well, they say Adam came first, and then Eve. So it's Adam and Eve and Christmas Day. I'm going to do that this year. I'm not going to eat ribs because we're going to leave those ribs out, because as far as I can see, if you really want to do it correctly, ribs should be missing. I hope you enjoyed this little silly talk of mine to some degree, and a little bit of history of why we have it. And stick with the idea. Let this stay in your mind. Let this be the takeaway. Fear not, for I bring you tidings of great joy to all the people, that unto you is born within you this day, right here, right now, something that will save you from your own useless, unnecessary, self-induced suffering. It will end it all for you. Awaken to the light. God bless.